You want to know everything? Well, believe me, you don't. This was an enforcement killing. I mean, they were making a statement. In this business, ignorance is bliss. Good evening, everyone. This is Stone Gasman live from New York City. And tonight we are going to be doing an audio commentary for the 1984 movie Mike's Murder, starring Debra Winger and written and directed by James Bridges. It's kind of an obscure movie, although its reputation has slowly increased over time since its belated release in March of 1984, to say the least. This film went through a lot of issues from the editing stage and ultimately to when it was released. The soundtrack was released 7 months beforehand, and evidently all that music on that soundtrack was virtually not included in the final film. Believe it or not. This is a film that has a very rough history, and but at the same time, it's a movie that I admittedly have returned to a number of times over the years. When I first saw this film, I saw it for one reason only: Debra Winger, because I've been a huge Debra Winger fan all my life. An Officer and a Gentleman, Terms of Endearment, Shadowlands, many films. I do love Debra Winger as an actress. Hell, I even liked her in French Postcards, which was a film that she made with Willard Huyck and Gloria Katz in 1979, which eventually got her the job on writer-director James Bridges' Urban Cowboy. And James Bridges evidently loved working with Debra Winger so much that he wrote this entire script of Mike's Murder for her, a neo-noir mystery set in L.A. in the mid-1980s. And it kind of showcases the Los Angeles drug underworld, which understandably made Warner Brothers executives very nervous to release this film. And but just to let everybody know, if you want to watch the movie, there's only two ways you could watch it. You could watch it on YouTube. There's the link for it. Or if you're lucky enough to have a DVD, because from what I can understand, it's not streaming anywhere. And, here again, I mean, despite the fact that Debra Winger was a strong box office draw back in the early 1980s, I mean, it seems like only film buffs and historians and filmmakers and that kind of in crowd probably are the only ones that know of Mike Murder's existence. I mean, but here's the thing. I'm very glad to be doing this audio commentary and talk about the film with you all. So if you want to get ready, just go to that link, and I am paused on the Lad Company logo for Mike's Murder, which you should see an all-white background, and a green tree is about to appear. Specifically, this logo right here is what you should be seeing come up on the screen as soon as we press play. So, but before we press play, just a quick announcement. My next two commentaries will be Thursday, Thanksgiving night at 9 p.m. I will be doing 1776, and yes, I know I should be doing this around the 4th of July, but I'm doing this on Thanksgiving Day because that's when it was released in 1972. So that's going to be a 50th anniversary commentary for that. And on Sunday night, I will be doing The Right Stuff, directed by Philip Kaufman, which will be the next Lad Company release. And I also have the book on standby to read as well. So you know what I'll be doing, preparing for Sunday night. I'm going to be preparing for this. But at any rate, and while I do this Mike's Murder commentary, I will also refer to the lovely book, The Films of James Bridges. Yes, James Bridges only made 8 films in his career, and Mike's Murder was number 6. And according to Peter Tonguette, this is actually one of 2 of Bridges' masterpieces, according to Peter Tonguette. I'm not so sure if I agree with him on this front. There's some other James Bridges movies that I actually prefer over Mike's Murder. But at any rate, I think we should go ahead and get started here. So I am paused on the Lad Company logo for Mike's Murder. and I will press play on 3, 2, 1, and play. And here we have the Wonderful Lad Company logo. And according to the book, The Films of James Bridges, Peter Tonguette said that this all basically started when Alan Ladd Jr. asked James Bridges, after he had made a 1-2 punch of The China Syndrome and Urban Cowboy, which were both commercial and critical successes in many ways. He asked him, "Hey, do you have any other films in mind?" And he's like, "Well, yeah, I have something, but it's not commercial, and I need complete control." And Alan Ladd Jr. was like, "Okay." And of course, Alan Ladd Jr., of course, like with movies like Outland and many other films that they put out, that the writer would also direct the film, which he was very trusting of directors with their own visions in putting them on the screen and everything. And James Bridges is no different. And with this film, Mike's Murder, this came out, well, actually, it was shot in 1982. Basically, even though it wasn't released until March of 1984, it was shot entirely in 1982. It was actually shot right after Debra Winger did An Officer and a Gentleman. And the thing is that she was pretty much ready to give up on Hollywood because she hated An Officer and a Gentleman. But to be fair to her, because, An Officer and a Gentleman is a beloved movie. I mean, I did a commentary on it for Memorial Day weekend and everything when Top Gun Maverick came out. But my whole thing with Officer and a Gentleman is that, it's got one of the greatest endings, I think, in film history, period. I mean, when you consider that, I mean, both are saving each other. A lot of people think that he's just saving her at the factory, but no, they're actually saving each other. And the thing is that, I mean, people love An Officer and a Gentleman and love Debra Winger in it, but she was never comfortable about doing the nude scenes, and she was, let's just say that when she felt that she was about to get the part and she was auditioning and everything, the producer Don Simpson actually told her before shooting began, there might be somebody else for the part, because I need somebody that's fuckable. You're not fuckable. And she, so yeah, just to give you a little window on all the crap that she had to endure during the making of An Officer and a Gentleman, but she was not happy making that picture for what it's worth. But working with James Bridges, I mean, she was, I think, in much more comfortable hands, I think, when working with him. I mean, especially after Urban Cowboy, which I haven't seen in many, many years. I mean, I remember there was a lot of country music. I remember, John Travolta on the fake mules or horses or whatever the hell they, I know they do that stuff in Stir Crazy. I can't explain it. The thing is that, I mean, if I was ever gonna do a commentary for Urban Cowboy, I would actually study that stuff. But yeah, the truth is, I forget what it's called. It's like, But Urban Cowboy, I mean, I haven't seen that movie in years. That was actually one of the few James Bridges fans I opted not to return to, at least not yet. Music composed by John Barry, additional music composed by Joe Jackson, and like I said, and associate producer Jack Larson. All these names are important as we go through this. Edited by Jeff Gorson and Dee Dee Allen. Yes. So all these names are very, very important. Director of photography, Reynaldo Villalobos. And we're going to talk about all of them in detail. But, I mean, and here we go. Written and directed by James Bridges. Yes. Wanted to say hi real quick to Rob Gasper. How you doing tonight, sir? Yeah, I've been preparing all day for this. So trust me, I'm man, I lose my momentum here. But anyway, let me go ahead and kick off with a quote from the films of James Bridges. In an impressionistic fashion, the first shots in Mike's Murder established the basis of Mike and Betty's friendship. Casual, offhand, and uncommitted relationship. We see Mike giving Betty tennis lessons, playfully helping her improve her serve. We soon dissolve to images of the two of them in bed together as John Barry's lush score overwhelms the soundtrack. But this is a film of juxtapositions, and the very next scene is a world away from Mike and Betty's ideal. In the middle of the night, we see Mike and his friend Pete Darrell Larson at a rundown restaurant called Big Tony's Famous Chili Burgers and Famous Chili Dogs. They order some food, which is memorably seen being prepared in the kitchen underneath the opening credits, but something else is clearly on their minds. After exchanging glances with a man who enters Big Tony's, orders a Pepsi, and then quickly leaves the restaurant, Mike and Pete head outside to the near vacant parking lot, where, in a wide shot, they execute a drug deal. The action is viewed from afar, as two men in a car are revealed to be watching all of this as it has unfolded. After the deal is done, the men drive up to Mike and Pete, bellowing something about how this is their, quote, territory. A melee breaks out, and Mike dashes off on foot. A wide shot of Mike running down a cavernous Los Angeles street, backlit by street lights, and completely alone, evocatively expresses his desperation. Another juxtaposition occurs when Mike hails Barry down in her car and tells her in vague but worrying detail some of the saga. After she drops him off at an acquaintance house, actually Philip's imposing mansion, we cut to a series of shots of Betty at work, manning the bank's drive-up window. The dreary routine of her job lacks the manifest excitement of Mike's life on the edge, echoes of the shots of Bud at work in Urban Cowboy, but its very plainness and safety makes it seem appealing by comparison. Yes. So like I said, this is the movie that James Bridges made after Urban Cowboy. Now, James Bridges had come from the state of Arkansas, and he worked in a lot in the theater and everything. His life partner was Jack Larson, who played Jimmy Olsen on the 1950s Adventures of Superman television series, and they were lifelong partners and collaborators. Very much until James Bridges' death in 1993, very prematurely at the age of 57. He only made 8 films in his career, James Bridges. He only, many of them he was involved in the writing in, not all of them, but many of them he was. Now, and here again, I read basically this entire book earlier, but outside of the 8 films he's directed, he's also done some other writing in terms of, well, the first 2 adaptations of his script he was not fans of at all. Basically, those 2 films were The Appaloosa in 1966, which, if you remember, was directed by Sidney J. Furie and starring Marlon Brando and John Saxon. He was not happy with that film, and he was also not happy with Colossus: The Forbin Project, which he also wrote the screenplay based on the novel Colossus by D.F. Jones, and that was directed by Joseph Sargent in 1970. I remember seeing Colossus: The Forbin Project in school, and I actually thought it was entertaining, but yeah, he was not a fan of it. So in 1970, with the help of Robert Wise, the legendary director behind The Day the Earth Stood Still and West Side Story and The Sound of Music and Star Trek: The Motion Picture. Well, Robert Wise had his own independent film production at the time, and so he gave James Bridges the chance to write and direct his first film, which would be The Baby Maker, starring Barbara Hershey. And it's basically about when a young flower child, played by Barbara Hershey, she gives up her baby for adoption, and then she's contacted by a childless couple who want her to have the husband's baby because of the wife's inability to conceive. She accepts the offer, but finds that getting to know the couple and developing a relationship with them for the entire pregnancy complicates the simple arrangement. And I saw this movie last night for the very first time, and I was immediately in tune with it for some reason. Right off the bat, I really loved Barbara Hershey's performance in it, and I liked how the relationships developed. Very provocative material for 1970. It felt like very ahead of its time, and it was really weird watching The Baby Maker after watching 5 seasons of The Handmaid's Tale. Very, very weird. But here we have our titular Mike of Mike's Murder, and played by an actor here by Mark Keyloun. Now it's weird because even though this was in a way, it was a major studio film because it was distributed by Warner Brothers. But technically, this is a Ladd Company film. Basically, Alan Ladd Jr. gave James Bridges, the green light to make this, uh, this movie based on somebody that he knew in real life. I'll go into that a little bit later because this movie does, like many of James Bridges' films, there's like a kernel of truth. There's actually, it's based on a real life person that he knew or met in his life and everything, and he sort of expanded stories from that. But as you can see here, Mark Keyloun, who plays Mike, is very, very nervous, and Debra Winger, very, very young, but also very curious and adventurous and ambitious and everything. And she, even though she knows that Mike isn't exactly ideal romantic material, I mean, not exactly the type of guy that you would want to bring your, to your home to your mom and, grandma and everything, say, hey, I mean, because the thing is that Debra Winger is basically kind of in lust with this guy. She kind of had a sexual awakening when they made love, that first time, but now this is 6 months later. And so, obviously she's been wondering and waiting all that time, for him to call, for him to get back in touch, because they, she, at least on her side, she felt that they had a very memorable date together. And it ended up very, very romantically and satisfyingly for her. But of course, Mike is a guy that lives on the edge. He's kind of, caught in these this drug underworld and doing all these tasks, and he's more concerned about making money to pay back what he owes. But I mean, look, I mean, but Debra Winger is so beautiful and so just riveting in this movie. Like I said, James Bridges wrote this script for Debra Winger. This movie exists because of Debra Winger. Let's put it that way, okay? The whole reason this movie exists is because of Debra Winger. James Bridges wrote the script so that she could make another movie when she thought she was done with Hollywood. In essence, it kind of drew her back, and then eventually she would do Terms of Endearment and get an Academy Award nomination for it. So, I mean, that's the thing, is that, I mean, because of James Bridges, Debra Winger came back, and then she did Terms of Endearment, and I love Terms of Endearment almost as much as An Officer and a Gentleman. Not quite, but and then after that, her career kind of spiraled and subsided to where she was doing films like Bob Raffleson's Black Widow and Ivan Reitman's Legal Eagles, and stuff like that, which didn't really do all that well. I mean, most of what she made for the rest of the '80s wasn't it wasn't up to scratch of her earlier output. But eventually, she would get another Academy Award nomination for Shadowlands. But going back to James Bridges for a bit. So after The Baby Maker came out and was, got some notice and everything, then he made The Paper Chase, which was based on a book. And according to the author of The Paper Chase, that apparently James Bridges got his book down to a T. It's the most faithful adaptation you could ever ask for. And on top of all that, he even praised James Bridges for including one significant change that he, slapped his head and was like, why didn't I think of that? That's how much the author of The Paper Chase loved that 1973 movie that James Bridges made. Yeah, so the author's name is John J. Osborne Jr., And he was very happy with the adaptation of the Paper Chase in 1973. It got an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for John Houseman, and it also starred Timothy Bottoms and Lindsay Wagner. And basically, it was about this guy that goes to a Harvard Law School, and it showcases his first year at Harvard Law and everything. I'm not really a fan of movies like that. So, I mean, this is one of my lesser favorite, I guess you could say, of James Bridges' output, despite the Academy Award win, which, it was deserved. But yeah, I saw it in high school, and I was, to tell you the truth, I was I struggled throughout it. I mean, I don't know if, I don't think if I revisit it, I don't know if my feelings are necessarily going to change. But I mean, it's got top-notch cinematography by Gordon Willis and music by John Williams and everything. And it was released by 20th Century Fox in October of 1973. So here again, another success for James Bridges. And then he made his next film, came about in 1978, set in his home, around his hometowns in Arkansas. And it was a very personal project for him. And it's called September 30th, 1955, which actually came out in 1977. And if that date means anything to you, it's the day that basically James Dean lost his life in a car crash. And so basically, James Bridges wanted to make a movie that was an ode to James Dean, and especially to East of Eden, which was practically his favorite movie of all time. I've seen East of Eden. I got to say, I would rather watch Rebel Without a Cause and Giant if I want to watch some James Dean. I mean, I struggled with East of Eden too, I must admit. But September 30th, 1955, which just got a Blu-ray last year, courtesy of Kino Lorber, by the way, and it does have an audio commentary by Peter Tonguette, who also wrote the book, The Films of James Bridges. But September 30th, 1955, it was produced by Jerry Weintraub, his second producing credit after Nashville. And this was, of course, he hit it big with Karate Kid and stuff like that. But it was just distributed by Universal Pictures in August of 77, and then in January of 78 in wide release. And they didn't believe in it. They didn't give it any advertising, anything like that. And but according to Peter Tonguette, he considers it James Bridges' masterpiece. I have not seen it yet. It's one of the few of the Bridges films I haven't seen. But this, along with Mike's Murder, he proclaims as the director's two masterpieces. But I love seeing shots of just Debra Winger just in James Bridges' frame, doing just doing these little things like talking on the phone and stuff like that. I mean, I could watch Debra Winger act in a trillion movies if she made them at this time. But she only made a handful, really. Like I said, this was shot right before Terms of Endearment. But anyway, so after September 30th, 1955, then he made The China Syndrome. And The China Syndrome, for those of you who've been listening to my commentaries for a long time, know that I'm a massive fan of it. I mean, it came out a few weeks before I was born in 1979. And this was, of course, 10 days after it came out, then 3 Mile Island happened, which gave it the film a massive amount of verisimilitude, and it became a blockbuster. And Jane Fonda, Jack Lemmon, and Michael Douglas, who also produced the film, they're all amazing in it. But James Bridges really moves the film like a thriller. He really, once he starts that engine in the beginning, and we just go off on this ride. And it gets scary. It gets legitimately scary. I mean, I think that's James Bridges' masterpiece, if you ask me. Even, granted, I haven't seen September 30th, 1955 yet, but I can't imagine it topping The China Syndrome. I can't see it topping that. And Mike's Murder, even though I've come around a little bit on Mike's Murder with this latest viewing and right before this commentary, to me, this is not even close to China Syndrome. You know, if I was going to do a ranking eventually of the of all 8 James Bridges movies, I would put China Syndrome at number 1 easily, absolutely easily. And I'm also a huge fan of his last film, which was Bright Lights, Big City, starring Michael J. Fox, which was another book adaptation which the author gave his seal of approval to, where basically, you know, Michael J. Fox lives, you know, he's a drug addict in New York City. He's working as a copy editor and everything. It's been a while since I've seen it, but if you like Michael J. Fox, you have to check it out. And also, if you like the film, get the DVD because it does have a couple of commentary tracks by the author of the book, as well as the cinematographer Gordon Willis. Get that DVD because those commentaries are invaluable. They are absolutely invaluable. Yeah, Michael J. Fox plays a 24-year-old from Pennsylvania who works as a fact checker at a major New York City magazine. His nights partying with his glib best friend Tad, played by Kiefer Sutherland, and his addiction to cocaine has led Jamie being frequently late to work and not finishing assignments on time. And as a result, he's on the verge of getting fired by his stern boss. Yeah, so that's based on a book by Jay McInerney. Yeah, Jay McInerney. Okay. It's a weird last name. Forgive me. It's a very weird last name. But yeah, it's based on his book, and he gave the film very high marks. But like I said, I mean, Bridges died in 1993. And I wish, I mean, those 2 commentaries on the DVD are great. I wish they had a James Bridges retrospective on there because that would have made it. And this was MGM that put out this DVD. I mean, seriously, go get that and grab a copy if you can because yeah, those 2 commentaries are invaluable. They really are. And here we see Debra Winger playing tennis again. And lo and behold, what happens? Oh, she's going to run into Mike again after another 3 months. So it's been 9 months since they've had sex. And it's been, 3 months since they last saw each other, which was that very, very brief meeting that we saw. And now they're finally going to see each other again when he happens to just walk by doing another lesson. Yep, there he is right there. Now, Debra Winger is obviously, being very, very patient with him. I mean, when I first saw this movie, I just was kind of like, now, wait a minute. I mean, you're seriously going to put up with this guy and, the fact that he's not calling you and everything. Well, like I said, that night that she spent with him meant so much to her that she's willing to wait and be patient. Or, maybe hopefully he will get better, or maybe that he will, maybe she'll catch him at a vulnerable moment where, maybe he can be saved from the drug underworld. Who knows? I mean, but she's still playing with fire, and she knows it. She knows she's playing with fire by, still talking with this guy and flirting with this guy and maybe hoping that something might come out of this. But now, after Bright Lights, Big City, unfortunately, with James Bridges, he only got one other credit for co-writing White Hunter Blackheart, directed by Clint Eastwood, which, of course, was about it's about about working on the 1951 film African Queen, a thinly disguised account of screenwriter Vera Tell's experiences while working on the film, shot in Africa at a time when location shoots outside the United States for American films were very rare. And the main character, brash director John Wilson, played by Eastwood, based on a real-life director, John Huston. Mm-hmm. So that's the last movie that he got any kind of credit for when he passed away in '93. Now, the only other movie I haven't mentioned that James Bridges wrote and directed, which, to be perfectly honest with you, I've seen once. I can declare right now it is James Bridges' worst film. And I doubt a rewatch would change my opinion. But despite the fact it stars John Travolta and Jamie Lee Curtis, the 1985 film Perfect is just far from it. It's just far from it. Now, it was based on a newspaper article that was written by the same guy, Aaron Latham, that also wrote Urban Cowboy, the article that became Urban Cowboy. So, and it was based on a series of articles that appeared in Rolling Stone magazines in the late 1970s, chronicling the popularity of Los Angeles health clubs among single people. Its story follows journalist Adam Lawrence, who is assigned to interview a successful entrepreneur accused of dealing drugs. Here again, James Bridges keeps going back to drugs in the 1980s. It's amazing. He is then assigned to cover a second story and decides to do an expose on fitness clubs, where he meets an aerobic instructor named Jesse Wilson, who does not have a great deal of trust in journalists. It stars John Travolta, Jamie Lee Curtis, Anna DeSalvo, Mary Lou Henner, Lorraine Newman, and Jan Wenner. And it was released by Columbia Pictures, but it was a total bomb. I mean, it had a $20 million budget, and it didn't even make $13 million. And I just remember watching it, seeing John Travolta doing all these gymnastics, these exercises with Jamie Lee Curtis as the instructor. And I just keep on looking, and I swear John Travolta had a sock in his shorts. I swear to fucking God that he had some kind of so he had something. Okay, he had something under that. I swear to God, he must have had a sock. He must have had a sock on, because I just could have said, no, that cannot be. That looks off. That looks totally off. But like I said, if I do a James Bridges ranking eventually, I will go back to Perfect and watch it again. But yeah, watching it that first time, I just thought it was really bad. It was long too. I mean, it's 2 hours long. I mean, Mike's Murder kind of pushes it at 109 minutes, but Perfect is like, close to 2 hours, and it just even with John and Jamie, it's hard to sit through. It really is hard to sit through. So yeah, those are the films by James Bridges, essentially: The Babymaker, The Paper Chase, September 30th, 1955, The China Syndrome, Urban Cowboy, Mike's Murder, Perfect, and Bright Lights, Big City. Those 8 films are the only 8 films that he directed in his career before passing away at 57 in 1993. And when I first saw Mike's Murder, I got to admit that I was rather lukewarm on it. Because, I mean, I was such a huge Officer and a Gentleman fan, of course, because of Debra Winger and, Terms of Endearment. And I even saw the crappy ones. I even saw Thank God It's Friday and Slumber Party 57, and a lovely little film called French Postcards, which she very nearly got the lead for that. She obviously wanted the lead for that. I mean, it was shot in Paris, showing like American exchange students going over there and get coming of age in another country, essentially. And but yeah, I mean, I like a lot of the films that she's done, and I think that she's a very underrated actress. I mean, she does have that. People have said that she has that reputation of being difficult to work with. I mean, I try not to listen to that kind of stuff. I mean, obviously, or follow that kind of, crappy gossip, I guess you could say, because, James Bridges, I mean, she had nothing but fond words for James Bridges. And from what I understand, she loved working on these 2 films with James Bridges. She was totally in her zone, evidently, with this, Mike's Murder, and, of course, Urban Cowboy. Now, we need to talk about Mike, because he's going to meet his demise very, very soon. because he has a few more stops to make before he ultimately reaches the end of his life. But Mike's murder is played by a guy named Mark Keyloun, Keyloun. And I don't think he's ever made another movie. I could be wrong on that. As far as I know, this is his only studio film. And it's not that I think he's terrible, but at the same time, I mean, he's, really, all he needs to be is, understandably why she is so obsessed in finding out what ultimately happened to him. This guy obviously had this kind of strong effect on her, but well, actually, he did make a few more films. Okay, he was in Sudden Impact, of all films, with Clint Eastwood. He was in Those Lips, Those Eyes in 1980, 40 Deuce. He did, and then he did a few more television series like T.J. Hooker, Evergreen, Hill Street Blues. He played Ensign Billy Quayle in War and Remembrance. He did a Murder, She Wrote episode, a Cagney and Lacey episode, and then he did Prime Suspect in 1989 as Sergeant Blaze, and that was pretty much the end of his career. So he didn't do much outside of Mike's murder, and needless to say, of all the things in his resume, even Sudden Impact, Mike's murder is the only one I'm willing to return to. And his scummy partner in this film is played by a guy named Darrell Larson. And Darrell Larson is going to be prominent in the second half of the film, as we will see eventually. But he was actually in the China Syndrome. James Bridges had cast him in the China Syndrome as, oh man, what did he? He was a young demonstrator. If you look, he is a young demonstrator in one of the many, in one of those many scenes in the middle of the China Syndrome. But in Mike's murder, he of course plays Pete, and I've seen him in a couple of other things. I mean, he was in the Manchurian Candidate, the 2004 version of Manchurian Candidate, as well as City Limits, and from 1984. Outside of that's pretty much it, though. See, that's what I'm saying. Debra Winger is an A-list star and working with a B-list cast, essentially, with one exception, and we haven't gotten to him yet. There is one exception that we're waiting on. And here we have our first glimpses of the cocaine. Now, notice how, they weighed everything in the beginning. Notice how they weighed it, and now they're checking out... okay, I admit it. I know nothing about cocaine. I've never done cocaine in my life. Let me say this. There was one instance where I was in a room where somebody did cocaine. Okay, I've only been one instance in my life where I was actually in the same room with somebody with cocaine. And I asked him. I didn't ask him if I could have some, but I asked him, "Do you think I could? Do you think I could test it and see what it would do to me?" And he recommended no. I don't know if that was just because he didn't want to share any or whatever, but he also felt that because from what I understand when it comes to cocaine, is that once you try it, you just want to get more and more and more of it. It's a very, very you can get addicted to cocaine very, very, very easily, from what I understand, and it costs a lot of money. So I mean, I'm still a virgin in that respect. I mean, I've never done cocaine in my life. I have no idea what it's like. I mean, I've heard people call it from everything from nose candy to whatever, but so unfortunately, I can't really give you any insight into this business that they run right here. But apparently, because of this being, this is the early 80s. This is Scarface era and everything. And this was something that obviously, movie executives were very, very nervous about putting on the screen. And that's what I'm saying, is that I think Scarface came out at the same time that they were editing this movie, from what it was meant to be in 1982 to something completely different. Now, I mean, look, I understand that they just, snorted some. They just snorted some cocaine. So you could use the excuse that, well, they're high and they're not thinking straight and everything. Look, we saw them weigh the bag in the beginning. You don't think they're going to weigh the bag after you take some? To me, it's just super obvious. He's like, nah, don't do that. Yeah, empty bags. There's a whole thing of cocaine there. We should take some. But see, this sequence kind of doesn't make any sense to me, because they walk out as if they, decided to change their mind on buying some, and they just ended up just stealing a bag of it. I mean, I don't know. It makes no sense. And what they're really doing here is signing their death warrant, of course. I mean, you want to make the excuse that they're doing this just because they're high, fine. But, just how stupid can you be? Oh, good thing he just wiped it off his pants right there. Yeah. Good thing he did that. Good thing he remembered to do that. 1 second, guys. Oh, okay. So let me read a little bit more from the book, The Films of James Bridges, in his chapter on Mike's murder. It is surprising, even a little startling at first, to realize how well directed Mike's murder really is. This sounds unfair, and it probably is. This film that preceded Mike's Murder, The China Syndrome and Urban Cowboy, both triumphed with critics and the public, and they are effective, accomplished films, as the previous chapter, I hope, demonstrates. But they lack the directorial distinction that marked earlier films like The Paper Chase and especially September 30th, 1955, not to mention the personal qualities those films contain to various degrees. By the time Mike's Murder was belatedly released in March of 1984, it had been 6 years since September 30th, 1955 came out. A long time, and time enough to forget that Bridges was much more than a maker of polished Hollywood product. The film's artistry thus took some critics aback. In the Boston Globe, Michael Blowen wrote, quote, Mike's Murder is so unlike Bridges' previous work that moviegoers might be surprised at its audacity. Don't be. James Bridges, with his fully formed work, has become more than a first-rate filmmaker. He's an artist. Pauline Kael expressed similar sentiments, writing in an impassioned review in the New Yorker, the film was, quote, probably the most original and daring effort of Bridges' career. One is tempted to shout, don't forget September 30th, 1955, but the effusiveness of Blowen, Kael, and other critics is understandable. Mike's Murder is a great film, equal to the very best American films of its period, including Peter Bogdanovich's They All Laughed, John Cassavetes' Love Streams, and Blake Edwards' Victor Victoria. It is also the best directed film of Bridges' films of the 1980s. He is unburdened by the silliness that sometimes mars Perfect, or the challenging production circumstances of Bright Lights, Big City. That isn't to say that Mike's Murder didn't have its own arduous history before it finally reached screens, but it's clear that Bridges felt during the making of Mike's Murder, much as Hitchcock did as he was directing Rear Window, I was feeling very creative at the time. The batteries were well charged. Death is never far from Bridges' films, whether it's the death of James Dean in September 30th, 1955, the killing of Jack Adele at the end of The China Syndrome, or the loss of Jamie Conway's mother in Bright Lights, Big City. Death is referred to in the very titles of September 30th and Mike's Murder. But it isn't death that interests Bridges so much as our reactions to it. As Dean's death was responsible for Bridges making his way to Hollywood in the first place, the death of a friend motivated him to write Mike's Murder. Actor Paul Winfield, the magisterial African-American actor best known for his sounder, had an affair many years ago with a guy he met on a film shoot named Mark Bernalek. Jack Larson told David Ehrenstein in The Advocate. After the affair, they stayed friends. Bernalek had a little apartment in Brentwood, taught the local girls tennis, and drove a cab. He was the handsomest person I've ever seen. Through their friend Winfield, Larson and Bridges got to know Bernalek, but his life didn't have a happy ending. Larson explained to Ehrenstein that some guys said he burned them in a drug deal. After things cooled down, we were supposed to meet for dinner, but then he was savagely murdered. Bridges was, according to Larson, incensed about it. Jim was haunted by it. In Jim's mind, he wanted to do a film about one of these girls who has a date. It's exactly what's in the film. With this very hot, convincing young tennis player, and how she, who is also haunted by what happened to this guy, goes into this world of things she remembered him talking about and tries to find out about him. She knew nothing about him except that he was a good tennis player and a hot guy. That was the genesis, and Jim wrote the script. Mike's Murder was made on a shoestring budget. Larson said the Ladd Company instantly on one Saturday made a deal to do it. Jim said he would bring it in for a certain amount of money, and I was going to be one of the producers of it. We met Alan Ladd Jr.'s house with Jay Cantor. Jim had the title, Mike's Murder, which Jay liked very much. Jim was impassioned to do it, and the film is a real roman éclat. Let's see. The creation of Betty Parrish sprang from Bridges' other motivation in making Mike's Murder, to lure his friend protege Debra Winger out of her premature retirement. Debra periodically decides to quit acting, Larson explained. She did Urban Cowboy, which made her a major star. And then she did a film with Richard Gere and Officer and Gentleman, which both she and Richard hated. I lectured them both one night at Paul Jasmine's house. I said, "You're both absolutely dumb. You don't talk against a film. It's a wonderful film. I enjoyed it. You're lucky to be in it." That's exactly what I would tell Debra Winger, by the way, if I ever met her in person. Quit the bad mouthing the film. And she gave up and left Hollywood. Jim wasn't having it. He wrote Mike's Murder for her, and she insisted to come out and do it. According to Debra Winger herself, I had made one of my very first left turns out of show business. He wrote this specifically for me to bring me back in and show me how this new independent approach was the wave of the future, Winger said. I believe I had moved back to Ohio, where Winger was born. It was based on a real story that had been gnawing at him, although Betty Parrish was a totally made-up character. Oh, her last name was my invention, was Debra Winger's invention. Otherwise, it's pretty much vintage Jim. Mike's Murder was shot in 1982, the same year that Winger starred in James L. Brooks' Terms of Endearment. But she seems far younger in James Bridges' film. Her character more inexperienced in life, certainly too immature to be the wife or a mother, making her propulsion into Mike's world all the more suspenseful. It's a demanding role, Bridges said, because it wasn't filled with a lot of things for an actress to grab onto. I needed someone who had that rare relationship with a camera that allows an audience to see or think. I knew Debra Winger could do that. We feel the play of the girl's intelligence, and her openness and curiosity are part of her earthiness, her sanity. To reformulate Francis Truffaut's famous assertion that Bonjour Tristesse constituted Otto Preminger's love poem to its star Jean Seberg, Mike's Murder is Bridges' love poem to Debra Winger. The similarities don't end there. Just as Seberg blossomed in Bonjour Tristesse after giving a flawed performance in her first film with Preminger, St. Joan, in Mike's Murder, Debra Winger surpasses her work in Urban Cowboy to such an extent that it is difficult to know what Bridges saw in her in their first film together to note what she was capable of, a performance of such subtlety, beauty, and humanity, one around which the entire film is built. Debra Winger is simply magnificent. And she would not do better work until she played Joy Gresham in Anthony Hopkins, C.S. Lewis, and Richard Attenborough's Shadowlands. Yep. Take a break from that. And there's not a lot more for that chapter. I mean, it's a very short book, but it pretty much sums up everything about James Bridges' films beautifully. Highly encourage you all of you to check it out if you're a fan of any of his films. Yeah. Now, on a rewatch, I have to admit that these scenes of, I mean, credit to the cinematographer Reynaldo Villalobos and, of course, director James Bridges for just making these scenes just so eerie. You know, going down a hallway of an LA building alone is just, you know, there's just something so unnerving about it. I mean, this is very much an LA movie, and a lot of the praise, you know, one of the big fans of this movie is Larry Karaszewski, the screenwriter, who of course co-wrote Ed Wood and People versus Larry Flint. He did a segment for this movie for Joe Dante, recommending it through his what's the name of that series? I keep forgetting. It's Trailers from Hell. That's the name of it. Yeah, Larry Karaszewski did an introduction of Mike's Murder for Joe Donnie's Trailers from Hell, and hopefully it gave the film a little bit more attention. But I mean, the truth of the matter is that Mike's Murder has always been a very obscure film. Looking over at IMDb, you know how many user reviews there are for Mike's Murder? Well, there's not many of them, but they're all positive, or pretty much the majority of them are positive, believe it or not. There's 23 reviews. 23 reviews. Forgotten neo-noir gem, grossly undervalued. One big void and one big curiosity. Funny how good films get attention 15 to 20 years later. Extremely well-made noir mystery. Debra Winger shines in 80s noir. Good mystery, underrated film noir. Very underrated film about the perceived laid-back LA. Anything but. Smart industry personnel, be they script directors, producers, actresses, set property agents, scribes, know the reality of the myth of ease per Los Angeles. The weather is the primer for the pump that has made the myth fact. LA is a very dangerous place for that very reason. And this film does a great service in depicting what the naive step into their own peril in assuming anything but that. And the next one, great movie. This is one of the most harrowing pictures I've ever seen. It is very good and very underrated. I only wish that this film was nominated for Academy Award for Best Picture, Best Actor, and Best Supporting Actor. Wow, that was written in 2001, but whether he knew it was from film from '84 or not, I don't know. Mike's Murder is first rate, a highly underrated classic film, a must-see for hopeless romantics. Really? No, I don't think so. Very good, underrated, and overlooked noirish film. And unfortunately, one of the few negative reviews is from my friend John Siruga. Back in 2006, he wrote this about Mike's Murder. But to be fair to him, he's not alone, because Leonard Maltin pretty much felt the same way. Scrappy, long-on-the-shelf film from director James Bridges concerns bank teller Debra Winger's obsession over finding out what happened to a guy she was dating who has mysteriously vanished. Bridges put this together with Winger after their partnership on Urban Cowboy, but it was a career low point for both. Oh, disagree. I disagree. I love you, man, but I disagree. Many trips to the editing room couldn't salvage it, causing one to wonder, did it have its soul removed or was there never a soul to begin with? If you can get through the muddled introductions, Paul Winfield makes a thoughtful performance as a gay music executive, and Winger does well with a very sketchy role. Joe Jackson performs 3 forgettable songs. His soundtrack album was already out and gathering dust by the time this picture finally arrived in theaters. Yes, let me talk about that for a minute, about the soundtrack, because I listened to the entirety. There's like the Joe Jackson soundtrack came out in September of 1983. That was 7 full months before the movie ultimately came out. And from what I understand, the original cut, which was very much in the spirit of like Memento and Irreversible, and that it played backwards and relied heavily on flashbacks. It was completely, changed because, I mean, Warner Brothers just, they panicked. They panicked at thinking that nobody's going to understand this film. And on top of all that, the apparently legend has it that the test screening, the test screening was one of the worst in Hollywood history. I gotta wait a minute. It's going to be difficult for me to find that section where he talks about the test screening, but just to let everybody know, we are now 51 minutes into Mike's murder. And see, we just saw Darrell Larson here take a bunch of coke. And now there's a couple of ducks, and a couple of, yeah. I noticed the ducks. I was like, oh. See, LA isn't all bad. We have ducks and swans and little ponds and everything. But, we still got our smog and our cocaine, But now I know Paul Winfield is coming up. Paul Winfield is a huge part of this movie, even though he only has a couple of moments in a not too long middle sequence, but I mean, trust me, it's coming up. It's coming up here. Okay, sorry, I was a little silent there, but let me. From the start of post-production, however, there were problems. Dede Allen had cut many of the great films of the 60s and the 70s. Arthur Penn's Bonnie and Clyde, George Roy Hill's Slaughterhouse-Five, Sidney Lumet's Dog Day Afternoon. But according to Jack Larson, her approach to Mike's murder was, in one respect, flawed. She is a great editor and she is a wonderful woman, Larson said. She had a daughter the same age as Debra's character, a very pretty girl who was on the verge of getting married. Dede identified Debra's character with her daughter. I felt, and then Jim later felt, that Dede's cut, and it's the only thing negative I would say, was too close. She was in all the time on Debra, more on Debra than on the boy. That was the major problem with the film, which is very unfortunate because he's a wonderful kid, Mark Keyloun. But the real trouble came when the film was finally shown to audiences. Here we go. Quote, it had one of the most disastrous previews of all time up in Larkspur Landing, Larson remembered. Nobody was prepared for it, Bridges said. They started screaming at the screen. They hated it. They booed. They hissed because the violence was so real. I had 2 black men cutting up a white boy and cutting his throat and the knife entering the heart and the blood spurting all over the wall. Girls were heard crying in the laboratory after the screen saying, how can they expect us to go on with our lives after we've seen this film? Kim Kuramada said, quote, I remember looking at preview cards when we did Mike's Murder, and people would say, where's the guy in the Navy suit coming in at the end to sweep her off her feet? They literally said, I want to see Debra Winger repeat her performance in An Officer and a Gentleman. They got the wrong preview audience. they quite simply got the wrong preview audience. We came back and something had to be done, Larson explained. Warner's was threatening not to release it. They were humiliated. They thought that they had a gold mine with Jim and Debra. Jim didn't want Debra, who he talked to into coming back from Cleveland, to have an unreleasable film. So he then asked Laddie to re-edit the film and do some shooting. Jim restructured it. He enlarged Darrell's part, and he had re-edited it with Jeff Gorson. Dee Dee went on to The Breakfast Club. She was already committed. Gorson said, Jim called me. He said he had this movie. It's very bizarre and very gory. And it was previewed. He said that Dee Dee Allen had originally cut it with him and she moved on to another project. He asked me to come in and work with him on it. In addition to addressing the violence in the film, Bridges and Gerson also gave it more of a linear approach, removing many of the flashbacks, some of which can be glimpsed in the trailer. And Bridges had originally included, nonetheless, much of Allen's editing was kept intact, Gorson said. The scenes that were really in question were the flashbacks and the murder scene. On those, we did a completely different approach. During the 3 days of additional photography, Marty Ewing served on the first assistant director. We went back to a house in Venice and we shot some footage at Darrell Larson's house. On the last of the 3 days, Kim had an appointment somewhere and had to be out of town, so he left me to manage it. On that day, we didn't do very well and we didn't get what we needed to get. So Jim called me the next morning and said, you know, I feel terrible about not getting this stuff. Is there any way we can go there and get these few establishing shots that we didn't get? We talked and I said, well, let me give Ray on the call and see if I can find the equipment and maybe we can go out and grab these shots. They were fairly simple shots, but Jim took it personally that things didn't go on well that last day. It was a trying time for him. And time your film doesn't mean test well. Ray and I went out with Jim and the location manager and essentially grabbed these shots before the police showed up, or the homeowners really knew what we were doing. It was a home under construction. Fortunately, the workers weren't there. Everything just worked out beautifully. We got the shots, and then I got yelled at by Kim for doing that because we hadn't planned it and we didn't have permits. All that stuff we were supposed to have, I was able to forego in my mind's eye because Jim wanted it so badly, and I so wanted him to feel good about it, getting it and not having to worry about it. He had so many other things on his mind. And there's the pool that Mike was talking about on the phone that he would want to hang around with Debra Winger, and I don't blame him, to be perfectly honest. I mean, but this is, we're coming up on the 58-minute mark. We're coming up on the 58-minute mark of Mike's Murder, and this is probably the best sequence in the whole movie, if you ask me, and it features an actor by the name of Paul Winfield, who is not this guy right here. No, and as a matter of fact, he is coming up soon to put on his bathrobe. There he is right there. There's Paul Winfield. Really excellent actor. In his book, he actually thinks this is Paul Winfield's best performance, even over movies like Sounder in 1972, which I do plan on doing a commentary on next month. And he was also, but 1982 was actually a huge year for Paul Winfield because not only did he shoot Mike's Murder during that time, he also did a movie called White Dog, where he plays a guy named Keys who needs to untrain a racist white dog, a dog that's specifically trained to attack black people. And so Christy McNichol plays this actress who adopts the dog and then takes the dog to Keys to basically rehabilitate the dog. And you know, it had this central question if in fact, if this was possible, if you could actually train somebody to not be racist, or if it's just, you know, there permanently or whatever, and there's nothing you can do about it. But it's a very interesting film. It got released by Paramount, but they got cold feet, thinking that they were going to be retaliated against for making a racist movie, which it wasn't. Uh, but then it got released by Criterion about 11, 12 years later, and it had a much bigger impact. Paul Winfield is very good in that. But audiences probably remember him most from playing Captain Clark Terrell, the captain of the Reliant in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. And he's very good in that movie as well. And I think this actor right here, I think the character's name is Randy, played by William Ostrander. And yeah, he's basically walking around in his underwear, getting Paul Winfield anything that he needs and desires. I mean, you get the idea. He's going to ask him for some cranberry juice here pretty soon, which is. But yeah, Debra Winger is really entering a dangerous world right here. That Paul Winfield makes it very, very clear that she really doesn't want to go any further. There's a, let me give you some answers. This is just the way it is, but eventually you're going to have to move on. Yeah. But like I said, I mean, Winger is just amazing to watch, and just in every scene of this movie. I mean, she really is that magnetic. It's just a shame for the preview that they had to get a bunch of Debra Winger fans who just wanted to see Officer and a Gentleman all over again, because this is not Officer and a Gentleman in any way, shape, or form. Now, this is a very interesting sequence because this gives an idea, a window into what this movie looked like originally before it was re-edited. Because here again, the movie is supposed to, I mean, the stories I've always read is that the original cut is supposed to go backwards like Memento. I don't know if it's that. I'm sure it's different than what a lot of us have in mind. But I mean, the thing is that, like the scene suggests right here, is that the original cut was made up of a lot of flashbacks, and we go through those flashbacks, but at the same time, we're going backwards in time and not really forwards in time. Here again, I mean, it would be very interesting to see what that original cut looks like, but unfortunately, even though Jack Larson said that he was going to try the hell whatever he could to get that cut out, it never came out. I mean, Mike's Murder is only available on physical media from Warner Archive on a bare bones DVD. There's Paul Winfield right there. Yeah, he really, and he's really going to make an impression when he comes down here in a minute. But kind of startling to see him on the screen here, and then he's like literally right behind you. That is a little intimidating, obviously, but. Mm. I mean, and that's the thing. But at this point, I don't think that the original cut is ever going to see the light of day. I mean, we would need a Criterion Angel for that to happen. But unfortunately, there's just not enough demand for this movie. I mean, Warner Brothers knows full well that this was a box office bomb, and they put it out on DVD, and they probably, honestly, I mean, a lot of their Warner Archive DVDs they actually re-release. I don't think they've re-released Mike's Murder. I think they put out a DVD about 15, 20 years ago, or yeah, maybe about 13, 14 years ago, actually, excuse me. They just put out this this DVD, and it probably didn't sell well. It probably didn't. I remember owning a copy at one point, but I do not have it anymore for some reason. Um, I liked it enough to buy it, but it was one of those things like, well, do I have a lot of reasons to return to it? I mean, aside from Debra Winger, well, now I do have reasons to return to it because I actually appreciate it a lot more on my This is probably my fourth viewing of Mike's Murder, or rather, the fourth time I've returned to the movie. And I think I finally have a lot of appreciation and respect for it, even though it's an odd movie. It really is an odd movie. I mean, it's not very audience friendly. I mean, I think the original cut, I think it just, would the original cut have done any better? Who knows? We'll never know. But, James Bridges was such a respected filmmaker at that time. But yeah, I think Warner Brothers was just happy that the movie was just going to be buried practically when, they finally put it out in March of 1984. It's funny, some of the critics, they waited until the film was like on HBO before they were able to see it and talk about it. But Siskel and Ebert liked the movie. I mean, you can look at their review online; they actually really liked the movie. And there were a lot of other critics that did as well, surprisingly enough. Leonard Maltin, his review in his book was really weird because he gave it a 1.5 stars. And he said the only reason why he didn't give it a bomb rating is because, quote, several prominent critics thought highly of it. That's why he didn't give it a bomb. I think he was scared of being retaliated against by these other critics that were saying it's great, and like he was going to come out as like the only one that was like, no, I thought it was crap. But I mean, when I first saw it, I just thought it was barely interesting. Like, I mean, I didn't really get the whole obsession that Debra Winger had on this guy. Like, really, move on. There are other guys in the sea, like me. I guess I just kept on asking that question all throughout, and I just didn't get what was the obsession with her. Well, now I know. She practically went through a sexual awakening when she was with Mike, and she refuses to let him go for many reasons, I guess. But Paul Winfield is just amazing in this movie. And Peter Tonguette, of course, also gives him rightful praise in here. In a 1998 Los Angeles Times appreciation of Mike's Murder, critic Kevin Thomas put it well. It isn't that Betty is, quote, desperate in her single state, she has a boyfriend, but that she has never been so thrilled or ultimately so touched by a man as she has by Mike, who has retained an innocence at his core and is indeed fatally naive. Betty loved Mike, as did Sam, but no one loved him more than Philip, played by Paul Winfield right here. Paul Winfield, quote, had always loved Mark Bernalek, Jack Larson said, referring to the real-life inspiration for Mike. When it came time to cast the role based on Winfield, the actor wanted to play himself in the film, and he did. Brilliantly. This is Paul Winfield playing himself, essentially. And play himself really is the right way to put it. The most Bridges changed was Winfield's profession, from an actor to a record producer, Larson said. Appropriately, the sequence in which Betty calls on Philip is in many ways the centerpiece of the film. The curving, tree-lined driveway to the mansion echoes those earlier shots of the winding hallways in Sam's apartment building, as Bridges expertly visualizes Betty's journey into Mike's world. To Philip, in his caftan on his Brentwood terrace, critic Sheila Benson noted in her favorable LA Times review, the feiny, doughy, cherubic-faced Mike was a love he will never forget. I adored Paul, Winger recalled. He played the hell out of that small role. Winfield was never better, not even on Sounder or Samuel Fuller's White Dog, than he has in Mike's Murder. The first openly gay character in a Bridges film was given life by one of the finest actors the director would ever work with. At Philip's mansion, Betty is first greeted by one of his assistants, Randy. As she waits for Philip, Randy says, "It's been a weird week. I've known 2 people personally that got murdered this week. They were both drug-related." Vincent Canby quoted this line admiringly in his New York Times review, but he seemed to take it as comic. calling Randy wide-eyed and naive. Well, Bridges said something very similar in an interview with Janet Maslin in the Times, and he wasn't kidding. Quote, I had known 5 people who had been murdered dealing drugs, people who had touched my life very casually, the way Mike touches Betty's life in the movie. More than any of his other films, long stretches of Mike's murder are infused with a soulful solemnity, not to be mistaken for the outrage of the China Syndrome. Reviewing Bright Lights, Big City in New York Magazine, critic David Denby scoffed at the film's serious tone. James Bridges, who seems to be warming up for a remake of Camille, is much too flat-footed. Referring to a deathbed scene near the film's end, Denby wrote, suddenly we're in a Bergman film where anguish is inescapable and unending. I think Denby is mistaken about Bright Lights, Big City, but this actually describes the tenor of Mike's murder well, and it is not to be made fun of. Even so, Bridges always finds moments of humor. Betty's Daisy Miller-like innocence is revealed again when she demurely says no thanks to Randy's invitation for her to join him in snorting some coke. During their conversation, Randy also speaks of Pete. I like Pete. He was a little out of control, but I like him. Philip doesn't like Pete. He pulls out a tape he made of Pete, Mike, and himself carousing in Philip's living room, with Philip eventually exploding at Pete after several bottles of wine from his cellar have been opened. In the video, Philip says to Mike in Pete's presence, I told you to keep that asshole out of my house. This escalates into a shouting match between Philip and Mike. The reaction on Betty's face as she watches tells us that she has likely never before seen Mike get angry, truly angry. We don't know what the final outcome is as Philip suddenly appears, ordering Randy to turn the tape off. He invites Betty to join him outside where Paul Winfield delivers a monologue comparable in every way to Richard Thomas's at the close of September 30th, 1955. Betty and Philip are in a two-shot as they walk around his spacious patio overlooking a hazy LA skyline, but Bridges then divides them. The camera pans with Philip as he mills about. As they continue talking, the film cuts between reverse shots of Betty and Philip. Eventually, Betty is standing in front of the ledge. After he asks, are you the girl with the C scale out of tune? He joins her walking into a two-shot. I thought so. Oh, God, he loved that. Seen mostly in separate frames so far, they are now joined in the same image, as we are about to learn how much these very two different people, a bank teller and a music industry mogul, have in common. And that's when they find out that they were both in love with the same man. Wow. Since Bridges and Jeff Gerson removed the footage depicting Mike's murder, the crime scene Betty views, grisly as it is, provides but a glimpse of what was actually done to Mike. Originally, Bridges said, we had knives and a cutthroat and blood spurting onto the wall. In the film as it was released, these acts are only indicated. This doesn't diminish their power. When Betty comes home, she is seen wailing in her bed, overcome not only by her sadness, but also the horrifying particulars of Mike's death. It is one of the few moments in which she loses control over her emotions. In this respect, she is nothing like Jimmy J, who often seems to be at the mercy of his. For most of the film, as if in a state of mourning, Betty calmly observes, Winger realized this. Quote, 2 days before shooting started, I realized that I didn't know what a person's face was supposed to look like when they're listening. Betty has an internal dialogue going on. Yeah, she hears voices inside and everything, and she is about to be met with a grisly scene. But we see all we need to see. I think that Bridges realized after that preview screen that, you know what, we only need a few shots to make the point across. We only need a few shots, and I think they did a good job here on, giving us just enough. This is all we need to see to get the idea. Mike's murder was Bridges' second collaboration with Reynaldo Villalobos. Since photographing Urban Cowboy, Villalobos' career had taken off. He had shot the smash hit 9 to 5 with Jane Fonda and Dolly Parton and Lily Tomlin, Paul Brickman's Risky Business, and Stanley Donen's penultimate film, Blame It on Rio. Kim Kuramada remembered, Jim and I talked, and he said, what do you think about Ray? I said, well, Jimmy, you gave Ray a career. If you think that he's the guy you want, and he will remember that, you're the one that gave him a career, I think it can work. But because this is a low budget movie, we have to have somebody who can understand that and at the same time satisfy what you want. Though Mike's Murder is far richer visually than Urban Cowboy, the director and cinematographer worked together in much the same way as before. We just looked at the locations and the story, and I just shot it, Villalobos recalled. I'd worked with him before, so it just continued like we'd never stopped. I guess he liked what I was doing, and he just let me do it. Working with Jim was very natural and very easy. As the film goes along, Betty's anguish searching is paralleled with Pete's ever more desperate attempts to avoid Mike's fate, as he pitiably flees his would-be assassins. Betty and Pete finally converge in the film's climactic sequence, which depicts Pete holding Betty hostage in her house on a dark and stormy night, much as he did in the denouement of the China Syndrome. When Jack Goodell takes over the Van Tannock control room, Bridges builds unbearable tension in a single enclosed location, aided this time by the shadow coming through the windows of a small, unlit house. This scene, the most intense in the film, and also the most prodigious work of Villalobos' career, summons memories of Bridges' classic episode of The Alfred Hitchcock Hour, An Unlocked Window. Yeah, before James Bridges started directing movies, he had directed a lot of plays, as well as a lot of episodes of The Alfred Hitchcock Hour in the 50s and the 60s. And this, in many ways, is basically James Bridges' ode to Hitchcock as well. He wrote it for Debra Winger, but at the same time, there's a lot of Hitchcockian elements sprinkled throughout this movie, which I think makes it stand out as well. But thinking of the original cut makes one think that this movie could have been filmed by Brian De Palma or somebody like that, considering all the gore and all the nudity that was supposed to be in it originally. But yeah, they scaled everything back for the final release. And like I said, I think probably for the better. For this particular film, I would say, yeah, that was probably the right way to go. But, I'm still, like many others, I'm still very curious to see what that original cut would have looked like. But sadly, it will probably never see the light of day. Unless you have somebody at Warner Brothers that will have a change of heart, but highly doubt that's ever going to happen because, well, there's no money to be made off it, which is understandable. Nobody's going to want to get an ultimate collector's edition of Mike's Murder, I don't think. I mean, maybe somebody like Via Vision down in Australia could tempt Warner Brothers to release the rights for an international release, and that would open the door to doing something. Because I'd love to hear Debra Winger talk about this movie. I would just love to hear, her being interviewed and talk about this movie and working with James Bridges and everything. I just love to hear that. We are coming up on the 1 hour and 18-minute mark. The 1 hour and 18-minute mark for Mike's Murder. And we got about 31 minutes to go. Excuse me. The beautiful coda of Mike's Murder returns us to daylight. As Betty walks in from getting the mail, she receives a call from her parents, who naturally express their concerns. She tries to reassure them, saying that she refuses to get a gun. She explains to her father that the thugs who killed Pete were not after her. While she is talking, she spots a package in the mail. It is from Sam. After she hangs up, she tears it open. Sam has sent photographs. The note inside reads, "Betty, thought you might like these, Sam." And we are transported back to the film's opening shots as Betty looks through Sam's photos of Mike and of Mike and Betty together on the tennis court. In receiving this gift from Sam, Betty demonstrates how much she has grown. She has become less propriety about Mike able to share his memory without others who loved him. The message of the final episode in Jean Renard's last film, La Petite Théâtre de Jean Renard. As Ronald Burgon recounts in his biography of Renard, a husband accepts it when his wife falls in love with a vet who had come to attend to their dog. But he learns the virtue of tolerance and decides that it is better to share his wife than lose her. I think that's almost it. I think that's pretty much it written about Mike's murder here. Now, okay, the soundtrack. That's right. We need to talk about the soundtrack now. I listened to the 1983 soundtrack in its entirety, which had all the Joe Jackson songs. I actually preferred the instrumental pieces. None of it's in the movie. They pretty much took everything that Joe Jackson originally had composed for the movie and took it out, which is really weird because, you know, with An Officer and a Gentleman, of course, they changed a lot of the music for the VHS release. Paramount, for some reason, did not want to pay for the rights for a lot of the songs. And so why is it they always got to mess with these soundtracks? I don't know. But the Joe Jackson stuff, I mean, I know he has his fans. I'm sure he has his fans. I much prefer the instrumental stuff than the vocals, or rather the actual songs. I mean, I didn't care for any of the songs, to be perfectly honest. I thought they were just a bit too upbeat. And from what I understand is that, I mean, in the original cut, is that a lot of times when, you know, on the radio, you would hear just Joe Jackson music. It's like everywhere you went around in LA, all you heard was Joe Jackson music, almost as if, you know, he was the only singer in existence. So I think that was another reason why they decided to go for a more traditional score. And that's where they got John Barry, who had actually done Body Heat for the Lad Company only a few years before, and contributed a wonderful score for that movie. But yeah, Darrell Larson as Pete here is so desperate because he knows he's going to die at the hand of these coke dealers very soon. And so, I mean, what he really needs to do is get the fuck out of town. That's what he really needs to do. And that's why he doesn't have any choice but to go to Betty's house and try to figure out how to get out of town from there. It's like Betty is like the last potential ally he has left, even though he technically has never really met her. But of course, she knows all too well that he's, you know, dangerous and desperate, which of course is a bad combination. So yeah, I mean the soundtrack, I mean the Joe Jackson stuff, I mean, I prefer the John Barry score myself, but I can't deny that I like the instrumental pieces on that Joe Jackson album. So it's really weird. I'm actually kind of glad they got rid of all the songs, but I did like some of the score bits. I did like some of the score pieces. So it's really weird. It's really weird. I mean, the Music Machine. Oh wow. And see the actress in this role as Patty. This is an actress named Brooke Alderson. Nothing much on her though. Like I said, this cast is largely made up of unknowns. Outside of Debra Winger and Paul Winfield, there's really not many other people here that that are recognizable. But going back to Reynaldo Villalobos, I mean, other films that he shot include The Running Man, Love and Basketball, Romeo and Michelle's High School Reunion, Denial, Coupe de Ville, Lucas, that's one of my favorites from 1986, and Telling Lies in America, Not Another Teen Movie, Jack in Maryland, and he's still working. In fact, he just shot a movie this year called Crooked Halos, about a troubled Iraq war veteran who comes to the aid of a high-priced call girl when she becomes entangled in the world of an Atlanta gang lord. So yeah, that's a movie he just shot this year. Amazing, amazing. Assistant editor Francesca Emerson, who had worked with Rawlins on Bingo Long, recalled David is the best as an editor. Oh, that was never mind. Okay, here we go. Sorry about that. Originally, the film's entire soundtrack was made up of songs by Joe Jackson. This too didn't survive Bridges and Gerson's re-editing. It was a terrible mistake, and Jim is culpable on that one, Larson said. Every time they got in a car and turned on the radio, any place you were, you had a Joe Jackson song. It ruined the integrity of the atmosphere. It was like a Joe Jackson concert. It was an absolute mistake. That's what previewed. So then John Barry came in and did a beautiful score. I'm an old-fashioned person. The scores of films need to tell the audience what to feel. This film, of all films, needed exactly that, to underline the emotion of the film. Among the admirers of Mike's murder, such as Hollywood Elsewhere blogger Jeffrey Wells, there's been a clamoring for a release of the original Bridges cut. But Bridges staunchly defended the changes he and Gerson made. Quote, I think this is a better picture than it was, and I never would have allowed it to be released otherwise. Fascinating as it would be to compare the two versions, it is hard to imagine a greater Mike's murder than the one we have before us. Unfortunately, the film's re-release was as mishandled by Warner Brothers as September 30th, 1955's release was by Universal. Pauline Kael speculated that Warner's probably breathed a few sighs of relief as they buried it in March of 1984. But this only spurred the critics who appreciated the film, like Kael, to speak up on its behalf. Mike's murder reaffirmed why people have a kind of respect they have for Jim, why they have the kind of respect they have for Alan Ladd Jr., Kuramada said. These are people who really do have a different take a lot of times. Their Hollywood is a different kind of Hollywood. Mike's Murder was Debbie Getlin's last film with Bridges. I didn't even finish that project with them, she said. I left before it was completely edited. I remember going to the screening, but I had just stopped working for Jim at the time. And the only reason why I did that was it was at a time with my children. I've been working for Jim for 7.5 years, and now I had an 11-year-old and a 7-year-old. She remembered those years as the most amazing chapter of my life. It was so incredible to be with Jim as he was going through these experiences. It was fun to see him in the very beginning of his career. Hollywood can be devastating to people. Hollywood can change a personality in a heartbeat. And I don't think that Jim ever lost the ability to keep things in perspective. Like that day he spit on my lamp. One time when Bridges was preparing The Verdict, which before Sidney Lumet and Paul Newman made it, he was going to direct as a vehicle for Robert Redford. Getlin was with Bridges in their office when an actor friend stopped by. On this particular day, he had 3 little golden retriever puppies with him. He knew that Jim loved dogs, so he brought them in. These little puppies were just kind of running around the office. I got down on the floor and I was playing with these little puppies. Jim came out of his office. He had just gotten out of his conference call. He sat down on the floor and we were both playing with the puppies. He just looked at me, having such a good time with these puppies, and he stuck his head in his pocket. He pulled out $500, gave it to the actor, and he said, Debbie, pick out which one you want. It's your puppy. Happy birthday. I said, Jim, it's not my birthday. Pick out which one you want. I took that puppy home and said that was the best dog I ever had. Mike's Murder was also the last time Villalobos was the DP of a Bridges film, though we did do some pickup shots on Perfect, which was photographed by Gordon Willis. I considered him one of my best friends, Villalobos recalled. If you needed help, he would help you. If you needed financial help, he would go, "Oh, yeah, fine." I found out later that he had helped a lot of people. He was a great friend. The thing that Jim taught me, because we were close, was more the ability to not take yourself so seriously, because the more you do that, the more it clouds your ability to see things clearly. Kurumada observed, he continued, if you can kind of see through the maze of everything that's going on, and you can be patient, you'll know what the right thing to do is. A lot of times he would come into my office, he would be totally frustrated because of something that wasn't happening, or something that, or someone that had permitted him to do would do, and now they wouldn't. But he knew how to balance that in his life. He knew when to have his bulldog Mike Ovitz go after somebody and when not to, and then go on the next day. He knew he never was going to be in a position where he had to work for money. He was never going to be in a position where, oh, I have to take this movie because I have to pay off this or that or whatever. From the very beginning, he had sorted all that out. It was never about being invited to the right parties or this or that or the other. Jim had a very fulfilling and private personal life with Jack and their artist friends. One day I went over to see him, and he had this David Hockney painting. It was just leaning up against the wall. I said, I've seen this. This is an incredible thing, and you just have it leaning up against the wall. And he said, yeah, I should find a place to hang it, but it's okay for right now. That's kind of the way that Jim was. He had this Frank Lloyd Wright house, but you never knew it, and unless you were ever invited there, you never saw what was inside. And here's all that's left of the Mike's Murder chapter. After years of advising Bridges on aspects of the film's incognito, Jack Larson finally took a screen credit on Mike's Murder. During Urban Cowboy, Bob Lamond, who was John Travolta's manager, said, you know, it would make everything much easier if you would take a title. Unless you take a title, the studio doesn't want to deal with you, Larson remembered. So with that, Jim and I decided I would take a title, and they would deal with me because Jim wouldn't deal with them. He did not want to talk with what he called the suits. On Mike's Murder, Larson is credited as associate producer, an overdue recognition of the multifaceted contributions he made to all Bridges films, not just those that his name appears on. For Bridges and Winger, the greatest sorrow was that they never worked together again. Other opportunities arose in the years following Mike's Murder, but none came to fruition. Winger remembered there was a script he dreamt of doing called Bee Season, not the one that was made and nothing to do with spelling bees. There was Wendy Wasserstein's The Object of My Affection, which I believe got made, and there was the Libby Hallman project, a biopic of a torch singer, which was probably closest to our collective heart. Bridges and Winger should have made all these films and more. After all, George Cukor directed Katharine Hepburn 10 times. And how many ballets did George Balanchine choreograph with Suzanne Farrell in mind? 23, according to Farrell. But Winger felt that what she learned from working with Bridges on even 2 films was enough to last a lifetime. Quote, suffice to say, Jim was and will always be my mentor. He taught me to trust myself. And without that, I would not have been able to work with any of the great directors I had the good fortune to make a film with him. And that's what Debra Winger says about James Bridges and Mike's Murder. And Urban Cowboy, which of course she also did earlier with him. So we're coming up on 1 hour and 33 minutes, 1 hour and 33 minutes into Mike's Murder. And we have approximately 16 minutes left to go as we deal with this very tense climax of Debra Winger dealing with Pete, who is on the road on the run from this cocaine mob or whatever. You know, I got to say that my cynicism when I first watched this movie is kind of diminished because here again, I mean, I ask a number of times why Debra Winger still pushes herself into this world. Because she ultimately has to deal with guys like these, and these are unsavory, unpredictable, violent people. It's like, how far did you really have to knock on the door? But Winger, she sells it, and she's wonderful in these climactic scenes with Darrell Larson. I mean, she's so good, she makes you forget how forgettable he is. Let's put it that way. Well, like I said, everybody, my next Lad Company commentary will be next Sunday night at 9 p.m., where I will be doing Philip Kaufman's The Right Stuff, based on the book, which, of course, I will be reading all this week. That'll be next Sunday night at 9 p.m. And then we hopefully will be doing all the rest of the Lad Company commentaries in December, starting on December 1st when we do the very first Lad Company movie, which is Divine Madness. Came out in September 1980 and showcases Bette Midler's 1979 Pasadena tour after she had completed work on The Rose that year in 1979. So those are all coming up, including Braveheart, Once Upon a Time in America. Yep, all the rest of the Lad Company movies I haven't done yet. And Blade Runner. Yeah, that's one's coming up too. Brooke Anderson was an urban cowboy with Winger as well, playing Bob's wife, Corrine. Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I didn't love Urban Cowboy. I thought it was just much too long, and I just look, I can see why it was a big hit. I can see why it was a big hit in 1980. I mean, people went to see it for John Travolta. I saw it for Debra Winger, and I liked it for Debra Winger, not necessarily because of John Travolta. But you know, I suppose I'm going to have to return to that one of these days. But I also remember it just going on forever, just literally going on forever. It might be Bridges' longest film, believe it or not. I think it is. It's 2 hours and 15 minutes. Well, like I said, I'll probably do a James Bridges ranking probably sometime maybe next year when I get the chance to return to Urban Cowboy and Bright Lights, Big City, and eventually watch September 30th, 1955, which, like I said, the author of this book, Peter Tonguette, really pushes as the director's masterpiece, along with Mike's Murder. He considers these two films to be the director's masterpieces. But like I said, China Syndrome is just number one. This is number one for me. Just because of the, you know, how prophetic it was. You know, I think it deserves the number one spot. Great use of light in these scenes, too. Man, very intense stuff. Very intense. Now look at Winger right here. She is showcasing genuine fear. Absolute genuine fear. And watching this again, I had kind of forgotten how it ended exactly. I mean, I got to admit, because what we ultimately see, what happens to Pete's character, I got to admit is very well done on Bridges and Company's part. Because I didn't expect him to exit the picture like this. I thought it was a much more... I thought that Winger had killed him, actually. I mean, I had actually completely forgotten. I thought that Winger had killed him for some reason, but no, he died another way. Something much more different and I think original. The way he goes here is pretty memorable. Okay, I mean, you know, he's high as hell. I mean, it could be understandable that he actually takes that as an earthquake by just shaking the refrigerator. Okay, I could buy that, I guess. Yeah. That's a great shot right there. I love that shot of Debra Winger pushing the piano up against the door. Really love that, especially. Yeah, ultimately we hear what happens to Pete, but we don't exactly see what happens to him, which in many ways is a lot more scary. He just won't leave her alone. And see there you see the black hands that took him and everything. The same two black guys that killed Mike are the same two guys that are going to kill Pete. And we know what they're capable of. We know what the murder scene looked like when it came to Mike. So we can only imagine that Pete is just going to be just as bad. But at least for Betty, the nightmare is over. One hour and 40 minutes. We're coming up here on the 1 hour, 40-minute mark. We got approximately 9 minutes left to go in Mike's murder. So yeah, if you want to listen to the original soundtrack, it's available in full on YouTube. You can go ahead and look it up and everything, but just prepare to understand that pretty much none of that music is in the actual movie proper. Here again, I like the instrumental pieces, but I didn't care for the actual songs. Like the first 5 songs on the soundtrack, and it's like 40 minutes of music, but it has like 4 or 5 songs by Joe Jackson, and then it has these 3 instrumental pieces. I far preferred the instrumental pieces over the actual songs, but that was me. That was me. And believe it or not, this film actually had even other bands on the soundtrack that I was a little surprised at. Yeah, we also had Without You, performed by Chaz Jankel. Out of the Business, performed by The Tubes. It's a Beautiful World, performed by Devo. Get Down on It, performed by Kool and the Gang. Rebels Rule, performed by the Stray Cats. And Big Bird, performed by the B-52s. Now, I don't remember all those songs being in this movie, but like I said, I mean, what really stuck out to me was the John Barry score. I mean, that's what I liked most of all, next to Debra Winger's performance in Mike's murder. Urban Cowboy, meh. Yeah, that was pretty much my reaction when I saw it. You know, I'll watch it again for Debra. But I didn't care for it. I did like it better than Perfect with John Travolta, though. I'll say that. I did like it better than Perfect. So that's ultimately what's going to happen to Pete, I guess. Yep. Dumped by the van with a bag over his head. But like I said, the nightmare for Betty is over. Yeah. And I mean, James Bridges, in these last 10 minutes, he doesn't include any kind of not necessarily sequel baiting, but like nothing else that suggests that there's like a threat lingering for Betty. She's gonna live. She's gonna be okay. The drug dealers are not going to bother her ever again, and she just needs to move on from this, from this loss, where she felt like that, something could have gotten out of that relationship. But that's the thing, is that, I mean, we all know that would have been a very short-term deal on any level, and it could have ended a lot worse for her. That's what I'm saying, is that it could have ended up a lot worse. Debra's character is very, very lucky. Very lucky to be alive. Got about 5 minutes left to go. Ready to close this out and prepare for my next commentary. But yeah, this is Lad Company commentary number 17. Pretty much finished. But yeah, all she gets now is the package in the mail with the pictures of Mike, which honestly, I would not keep those pictures. Okay. That is just me. But in fact, I think, deep down, I'd like to think that Betty would prefer that Sam had not sent her these pictures. But like, does she really need a constant reminder of this guy? I don't know. Like I said, maybe I'm just not seeing it as the masterpiece that some other people are seeing it, but I have come around on it. I mean, I'd give it before I would give it a 3 out of 5. Now I'd give it a 4 out of 5. I mean, it's it's certainly well directed. I mean, if anything, it's well directed. Great performance by Debra Winger. Really good score by John by mhm, by John Barry. Really good John Barry score as usual. Cinematography is amazing. I just don't think it's a very audience pleasing movie. I don't think this is not a movie that's ever going to gather a wide audience. It's just not. I don't think it had a chance in '84, to be perfectly honest. But despite Winger's star power at the time, and she was indeed a star. And that's the final shot of Debra Winger in James Bridges' Mike's Murder. And here is the credits right here. So at any rate, I hope you all enjoyed Mike's Murder. It's a very very obscure movie. I like it a lot more than I used to. In fact, I've come around on it and think it is definitely one of James Bridges' better films. Maybe not far from his best. I mean, like I said, I mean, China Syndrome will always be #1 for me. And I mean, as far as Debra Winger is concerned, Officer and Gentleman will always be #1 for me. But I mean, I think this movie is worth seeing. I think it's definitely worth seeing. And in closing, I want to quote a article from last year, from December of 2021, from allthingsthriller.com. The New York Times reviewer Vincent Canby wrote, "A case might be made that Mike's story is a cautionary one, that his fate represents the corruption of innocence, but this movie appears to be less interested in fate, in making LA lowlife seem as exotic as it is dangerous. Ouch. But perhaps Mike's Murder had the misfortune of being judged by another, much more stylized erotic neo-noir of the '80s, Lawrence Kasdan's Body Heat. Whereas Body Heat is unquestionably the better film, it is also on the opposite end of the erotic neo-noir spectrum. Mike's Murder is a quiet, understated film that comes to a slow boil. Director James Bridges' unobtrusive style does not objectify his subjects or exploit their circumstances. But that is not to say the film isn't hot. It is. And while it may straddle the boundaries of between noir and thriller, it is unabashedly erotic. It's compelling too, and terrifying. The last 20 minutes comprise one of the most on the edge of your seat endings in all of cinema. But it's the camera work of famed cinematographer Reynaldo Villalobos, snaking through the neighborhood haunts of LA as Betty drives, mostly in broad daylight, that brands Mike's Murder with genre-defying atmospheric dread. And it's Debra Winger's performance as Betty, the girl next door, mourning the tragic death of a young man gone before his time, and her own all too brief sexual awakening that hurts and haunts. And once again, that is from Worth Another Look, Mike's Murder, a film directed by James Bridges' erotic neo-noir, from allthingsthriller.com. And that was written just last year. Written by Pamela Lowe Saldana. Yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is Mike's Murder. Thank you so much for joining me tonight, and I will see you all Thursday night for 1776. This bad boy right here. We're going to knock that one out. A Lad Company release through Warner Brothers, a Warner Communications company. Thank you all for joining me. You all have a good night. Thank you.